everyone. Welcome back to Website Success. I'm Chrissy Ray, and today we are continuing our journey into the world of website accessibility. If you didn't catch the last episode, go back and have a listen to that because it covers a lot of the what and why of accessibility. And in this episode, we're going to cover the how. So let's dive in. In the previous episode, I talked a little bit about the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG. And that's what I'm going to focus on in this episode. You can find a quick reference of the latest version of WCAG at w3.org/WAI/WCAG22/quick-ref. And that's 22 because it's 2.2 is the current version as of the recording of this episode. As I mentioned in the last episode, WCAG is built on 4 foundational principles, and those are perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Each principle is a pillar supporting the structure of an accessible website. So let's take a look at how you can implement each of those principles in your website. Starting with perceivable, Guideline 1.1.1 tells us that non-text content should have text alternatives. So this means things like adding alt text for your images, transcripts for podcasts, and captions for your videos and audio. It's all about ensuring that no matter how someone interacts with your content, they'll get the full story. If you found my podcast through websitesuccessacademy.com, you'll know that I add a transcript to every podcast episode. It doesn't just make the content more accessible to users, which is really important, but it also makes it readable by search engines, which can help my SEO. So that's an added bonus. Now, what about text? That also needs to be perceivable. So, for example, Guideline 1.4.3 says that text and images of text need to have a color contrast ratio of 4.5 to 1, unless the text is a logo, or if it's pure decoration, so if you just have some text there that doesn't have any meaning behind it, or if it's large text. In the case of large text, the color contrast ratio is going to be 3 to 1. Now, those ratios are the minimums. Guideline 1.4.6 calls for a contrast ratio of 7 to 1 to reach AAA accessibility. And you can use tools like Adobe Color to make sure your color palette is not only aesthetically pleasing, but it's also accessible. By the way, if you go through the guidelines and as you listen to this podcast, you'll hear references to different levels of accessibility ranging from A, which is the lowest conformance, up to AAA, which is the highest conformance to the guidelines. Aim for the highest level of conformance that you can reach to make your website as accessible as possible. All right, back to the guidelines. Another guideline related to text is 1.4.4, which says that text needs to be resizable without assistive technology up to 200% without any loss of content or functionality. If you're like me and your eyes aren't that great, you might have a hard time seeing tiny text on websites, so you'll really appreciate this one. Now, I personally set my default scale on my browser to 125%, so I can actually read what's on my screen without having to put the glasses on or put up some kind of magnifying glass to read my screen. That's something that you really want to have available on your website. Next up, we have operable. Your site needs to be navigable by everyone, whether they're using a mouse, a keyboard, or some type of assistive technology. Guideline 2.1.1 emphasizes keyboard accessibility, ensuring that all interactive elements are reachable and usable without a mouse. So if somebody can't use a mouse, they need to be able to use the keyboard. So try navigating your site using only the keyboard. Can you access everything? If not, it's time for some tweaks. And this one might require some help from a developer because it usually requires changing the code of the website. Forms are another critical part of the operable principle. And all form controls should be operable through keyboard interfaces. So you should be able to use your tab key, your arrow key, type things in, press enter to submit, and everything like that. Forms do also fall under the understandable principle, which we'll talk about in a minute, And that requires your website's language and functionality to be clear and intuitive. So, for example, Guideline 3.3 talks about labeling each field clearly, providing instructions, and ensuring that error messages are informative and easy to address. An accessible form is like a friendly conversation. It guides you through making sure you're understood and that you understand in return. Speaking of understandable, 3.1.1 says to set the default language of your site, which can help assistive technologies like screen readers work more effectively. You should also use clear, jargon-free language and provide any instructions that might be needed. Your goal is to make sure that anyone, regardless of their ability, can understand your content and navigate your site with ease. Finally, we have the robust principle. We're talking about solid, clean code that stands the test of time and technology. Guideline 4.1.1 is all about ensuring that your code is error-free and compatible with current and future assistive tools. That means using valid HTML and providing complete start and end tags, among other technical specifics. If you're not a coder, this one can be a little tricky, and you'll have to rely on the developers who help you create your website, whether that's WordPress theme and plugin developers, Squarespace programmers, or the creators of whatever website builder you use. Integrating all of these guidelines into your workflow from the get-go is far simpler than retrofitting accessibility later. And remember, while automated tools and checkers are helpful, they are no substitute for real user feedback. Make sure you involve people with disabilities in your testing process to get genuine insights into the user experience. That's it for today's episode. We've covered a lot, but there's always more to learn. So be sure to check my YouTube channel for some videos that walk you through using some accessibility tools and give you concrete steps for making your website more accessible. As always, I'm Christy Ray. Thanks for listening.